Hello there everybody and welcome to this ranking video. Now, I did originally want this to be a ranking of season 5 of Thomas, because duh, it's the best season.
Call yourself a car, you're a disgrace to the road. Find yourself a scrapyard.
But then I thought, what if I ranked the most nostalgic season to me instead of the best one? Which, that nostalgic one is season 9. Now, season 9 is the second season of the hit era, aka season 8 to 12. Now, season 9, in my opinion, is probably the best season of the hit era. Probably because it has the best balance of good and okay and bad episodes. I mean, season 8 is just boring. Season 10 to 11, while it has some good episodes, is not that good overall with the bad and okay ones, and we just don't talk about season 12 here. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't, well, terrible episodes here, but I thought, considering on how many times I watched season 9 as a kid, personally, I thought it would be interesting to rank them and look back on my childhood. So, without further ado, we will start this list at the F tier episodes. Hoo boy. Honestly, going into this ranking, I pretty much knew what would be at the bottom spot. And if you ever watched season 9 or heard anything from it, you may know that episode. It's Skarloey the Brave. Hoo boy. So instead of talking about it in a normal fashion way, I'm just gonna cover the episode for you and then talk about it. Because I don't know where to start. So, I guess it kinda starts okay with the little village being introduced. I mean, I kinda enjoy that. But then the episode literally instantaneously goes down a snow hole. So, Rheneas is for some reason scared of the incline, which obviously leads to Skarloey going like, "Hey, you're scared. I'm very brave." May I remind you, he's the old wise engine, and he sounds like a little kid here. Anywho, the incline breaks, and of course we get a random cameo from Thomas, because he gotta appear in every episode, and then Rusty saves the day, again. So because of that, for some reason Skarloey is mad at Rusty, and now he wants to prove that he's the bravest engine. By how, you may ask? By getting pulled up on the freaking incline intentionally. Which is literally what Duncan did in season 6, but there, it was an accident because he got the couplings tangled up. But here, Skarloey just want to show his ego to everyone. Great plot for the children. Which obviously leads to Rheneas and Duncan thinking he's brave. Which, like, Duncan, what happened, my dude? Anywho, of course the incline breaks again, and Michaelangelos and Michael Brandon, the narrators, that make the best sound effect of all time, and that's the only good thing about this episode.
Weep!
Now, after Skarloey crashes, the Fin controller just tells Skarloey off, and so, because of that, the only solution Skarloey has is just doing his job, which, like, duh. But of course, while Skarloey gets his trucks, Rheneas and Duncan tell him to maybe go down the incline again, so that he's truly brave. But dude, Duncan, do you have dementia? Anywho, of course, Skarloey rejects and he saves the day by bringing the coal. Hooray! So, what did we learn, kids? That this was the start of Skarloey's 7-year downfall. Like, you know, he was the old wise engine that used to make fun of other engines sometimes. But between season 9 to 12, he turned into an annoying brat. Now yes, in 2012, in Blue Mountain Mystery, they did fix his character, but that doesn't mean that we should ignore the fact that Skarloey's episodes in the hit era were one of the worst episodes in the entire series. Like, I just don't want to talk about this episode anymore. Let's just move on.
Edward is swinging on a bridge!
Saving Edward is kinda like Skarloey the Brave, but like, boring. I mean, both episodes kickstarted the derailment of two old wise characters, which, like, how did that happen? But here, the episode itself is just kinda boring. I mean, it's about Edward being afraid of being scrapped, even though in his previous episodes he always proved that he's still really useful. So he asked Thomas to like bring his trucks of fruits to Knafford, but then Sir Top Hat is mad about this, but when Thomas explains that like Edward was afraid he will be scrapped, Sir Topham Hat is like, ho ho ho, come on Edward, you'll get mended. So meaning that the entire episode was like pointless. I mean, the only reason why I preferred this episode is because of Thomas and Edward's bond. Like, you can still tell they care for each other. But other than that, this episode is just really bad and boring, honestly. And like, it's kind of a Thomas episode, even though he already had like 13 other episodes in this season to himself. So it's kind of sad that he took Edward's episode as well. But don't worry, I have more to say on the next episode. Hoo boy!
Oh, what is it, Neville? I couldn't get your chocolate waffles. What?
Thomas and the New Engine's basically the episode about racism, but like, it doesn't work like at all. So there's this new engine Neville on the island, and Thomas sees him talking to Ari and Bert, and he's already suspicious of him for some reason. So he tells this to James, who is like the biggest diesel hater on the island. So James starts spreading rumors, which all leads to Emily telling Neville to get off the island. And Thomas sees this and realizes his mistake. But then, conveniently, Toby tells the audience that Ari and Bert were mean to Neville, meaning that they shouldn't even have hated Neville. Which of course ultimately leads to a crash, which I'll admit looks good. But like, other than that, what happened here? So, in 2005, before Season 9, Hit released the movie Calling All Engines, which was about the Steamies and Diesels putting their differences aside. And this episode just goes to prove that Hit doesn't even care about their own continuity. Like, it's kinda sad that they all believe in one rumor on the day the engine arrives and just start running along with it. Also, Neville, the new engine, is such a nothing character. I mean, he literally only has like 4 lines in the entire show, and 3 of them were in this episode. That just goes to show that Hit didn't even really care. They only wanted to make toys out of him. I mean, I guess it was kind of interesting to see him pull Annie and Clarabelle, but other than that, this is a very basic Hitter episode that just doesn't work in its own continuity. Anywho, time for the E-tier episode. Rheneas and the Dinosaur is like basically Scarlowy the Brave, but just with Rheneas. Like, literally that's all there is to say about this episode. Like, okay, Rheneas is not as annoying, and Scarlowy himself is also not as annoying in this episode. Like, one of the good things is their bond, like, they still act like how they kinda did, but there are more problems here. Like, for example, on the fact that Mr. Percival just lets Rheneas do the job even though he knows that 2 engines need to do it. Like, it doesn't seem like there are other engines working. Like, he literally said he's gonna find another pair. So, like, seriously, what is going on there, my dude? And I mean, I guess the crash scene with Scarlowy was kind of stupid, but like, other than that, there isn't much to say about this episode. And you'll probably see that in a lot of episodes, so let's just move on. Anywho, now we're at the D tiers, starting off with a toot. Tuneful toot. And yeah, I don't know what to say. This is another bad narrow gauge episode. I mean, I guess it's interesting that Sharon Miller wrote this episode. I mean, you know why it's interesting, because, you know, later she would ruin the franchise for a little bit, but you know. I mean, in this episode, the narrow gauge engines for some reason hate Rusty's horn for no reason whatsoever. And like, I don't really care since Rusty himself is not that enjoyable in this episode. And like, I just want to ask, why were the brass band, why were they like so common in this era? Like, why? Why? Why does one man gotta see so many brass bands in the hit era? But again, just like last time, there isn't much to say after that. It's just another basic hit era episode. And like, I just want to say, even though this is a Sharon Miller episode, there's quite lack of the free strike formula. So like, was that a good thing or nah?
Tell you this, if anyone knows what these pigs are up to, it's Eagle.
Hey look, it's an episode where Thomas finds an eagle, and then just doesn't do his job and lets Percy do it instead. Like, that's basically Thomas and the Golden Eagle. This episode is just kind of insultingly bad. Like, why is he so interested to see a golden eagle? And like, why does he just let Percy do all his job? I mean, it's kind of interesting since this is the only Thomas and Percy episode this season. But like, even then, it's not like enjoyable whatsoever. Also, like, why was Birdie wanting Thomas to see the golden eagle so badly? Like, Birdie, are you trying to make this episode unenjoyable? But like, other than that, again, there isn't much to say. So, yeah, expect so many times for me to say these lines of not knowing what to say. Thomas and the Rainbow is, again, kind of like Thomas and the Golden Eagle, just a bit more enjoyable. I mean, to me, this episode is kind of memorable because in the Hungarian releases of Season 9, this was the first episode, so that's why I kind of remembered it. But outside of that, it has its old mundane stuff. So in this episode, a storm hits the island and destroys all the telephone lines, so Thomas has to go and fix them. But of course, he gets distracted by a rainbow. And I just want to comment on this. Why are there only telephone lines everywhere in this episode? Like, seriously, there are everywhere in this episode. And like, I'm just saying that considering that in other episodes, they just basically don't appear. Like, wow, how convenient. And like, it's kind of weird that Thomas feels bad for himself for not talking to Percy for a minute. Like, dude, I don't think Percy is mad about that. Though, I want to say I kind of like that Edward is the one to tell Thomas what a rainbow is. Though it's kind of weird that there's only a rainbow right now on the island. Like, you could have swore that at least Thomas would have seen a rainbow at some point during the other seasons, but whatever. Anywho, now we're on to the C tier episodes. This sure is gonna be a long one. Emily Knows Best is like not the worst Hetera Emily episodes, like it's kind of one of the more enjoyable ones, but also it's still annoying. So in this episode, Emily finds out on what a monarchy is, I guess, so she decides to be queen for a day and, you know, boss Percy all around. Which of course leads to a convenient crash. And of course Toby tells her that, you know, this isn't how you do, and of course she learns to behave herself. Hooray, we already saw this like a million times before. I mean, the reason why this episode is kinda better is because it at least shows light on Percy and Toby's friendship. Like, in the Hit era especially, and later on, they did nothing with this relationship. Like, I feel like this was the last time they did anything together as friends, I think. But yeah, other than that, there isn't much to say. Let's just move on.
The fog is coming. The fog is coming. The fog is coming. The fog is coming.
The only notable thing about Bold and Brave is that Ben has a solo role in this episode. Like, that's it. Diesel isn't really interesting. The story he tells Thomas is, like, weird as heck. And, like, I don't get why Thomas is so afraid of this. Like, if the story was true, then, like, he would have known this at this point. So, like, dude, why are you scared? But other than that, I guess there isn't much to say about this episode. It's just, yay, Ben has a solo role. Who doesn't love that?
Oh dear, exclaimed Thomas. It's getting late. Oh, I'd no idea. Oh, I must find Annie and Clarabelle.
Oh look, it's another episode with Diesel in it. How fan. Flower Power is basically just Ghost Train from Season 2, but with Thomas instead of Percy. Like, literally, that's the plot. In both episodes, they get flour on them and pretend to be ghosts. But here, Thomas intentionally becomes a ghost, unlike Percy, who accidentally got ghost. And like, there isn't much to say. It's kind of nice that they reference Henry's Forest, and like, you know, who doesn't love that? But like, other than that, again, there isn't much to say about this episode. You'll kind of see this in a lot of episodes. Let's just move on.
You got a friend you meet.
Thomas and the Toy Shop is kind of like the basic definition of a Thomas episode. I mean, I like how the ground looks in this episode. It got that nice little November-ish feeling. But other than that, I guess Henry and Thomas's bond is kind of touched upon. So, you know, that's kind of cool. But, like, it's weird as heck that they just decided to put up Toy Shop at a train station. Like, why would someone want to go to a toy shop at a train station? Like, Dude, that's kinda weird. But other than that, there isn't much to say. I'm just gonna leave this place.
He's not loyal to a flag.
Henry and the Flagpole is a okay little Henry episode. I mean, I like that in this episode Henry tries to prevent a big tree from turning into a flagpole, but the problem is that this is a misunderstanding. I mean, yes, I know that it's a big tree, but I don't get why Henry would think they would cut that one specifically, like that's just kind of weird. Also, when Henry broke the flagpole, Salty made it seem like it was Henry's fault that it got broken, and not his, like, Salty, admit that it was your fault. But other than that, it's an okay little episode. Moving on.
Milky!
Thomas's Milkshake Muddle is like one of the dumbest titles I have ever heard, and I love it. I mean, in this episode, Thomas finds out that he can actually make butter by shaking milk. Like, that's actually smart. Good job, Thomas. I mean, because of this episode, I learned that butter is connected to milk, so, you know, I guess I learned something from this. I mean, this episode is also known for being the debut episode of Molly, so that's kinda sad that her main episode wasn't the debut of her. But other than that, I don't have anything else to say, so yeah, let's just get to the last C-tier episode.
She looked very yellow.
So you know how I just talked about Molly? Well, here's Molly's special. Even though this is a Thomas episode, I think it's a good one because in this episode he tries to make Molly's first day special, which is something that he did not try to do with Neville. Plus, I like that Thomas tries to prove Emily wrong in this episode. I mean, yay, finally someone rebels against Emily, yippee. But also, here comes the main problem, is like, why did he want to show everyone Molly's special? He could have just showed it to Emily, and like, not to Gordon, who is very mean-spirited about it. But, I'll admit, Gordon was quite funny in this episode. And that's it with the C-tier episodes. Now we're on to the B-tier ones.
Peter, Sam,
and the magic torch.
The way I would describe Magic Lamp is basically the Sharon Miller Free Strike formula, but actually done well. I mean, in this episode, Skarloey tells the legend of Proteus. And this is the only time Skarloey is in character in the Hetera, so that's neat. But Peter Sam doesn't believe in the story of Proteus, so he just goes away to do his job. What happens after that is basically the Free Strike formula of him seeing a light, thinking it's Proteus, but that it's not. And every time he sees it, he starts realizing that, you know, what he said may have been not true. And at the end, he says, well, it's a story. And yeah, he just goes on to actually respect the story. I mean, in season 12, he finds a statue of Proteus and is like, let's preserve this. So, you know, Peter Sam grew as a character. So that's nice. And yeah, that's all I have to say. I mean, it's good that there's a Narrow Gauge episode where a Narrow Gauge character doesn't get assassinated. So, you know what? Good for you, Peter Sam. Thomas's New Trucks is about an episode where the engines have their own trucks for some reason, but other than that, this is a pretty good episode. I mean, one of the reasons why this episode is really good is because of Thomas and James's rivalry. Like, it's spot on, it's really good. And I also love how James's trucks want to be dirty while James tried to keep them clean, like, that's also really good. Plus, there's a Bill and Ben cameo, you gotta love that, and the crash is also pretty nice. It's just kind of weird that there are old trucks and new trucks and, you know, the engines having their own trucks, like, that's kind of weird. But other than that, this episode is really good. I actually kind of recommend it.
Happy birthday!
Thomas and the Birthday Picnic is another good example of the Free Strike formula, but instead of 3, it's 2. Plus, Dowager Hat appears in this episode in a different dress, so, you know, that's neat. Also, I gotta be honest, I love the scene where the engines just talk about how to do a good whistle. It's just a nice little interaction between the characters, just a nice little fun scene. Though, it is kinda weird that they just decide to not be at Shen Valley. Like, I know that the place looks like but like, can't you move a little bit further at a place that doesn't look like shit? Then you would be fine for a birthday picnic. But whatever, this is a nice little episode, and honestly, good for Dowager Hat for having a nice birthday. Duncan and the Old Mine is surprisingly really good, actually. Like, sure, it's weird that he actually acts nice in this episode. I mean, his main character is known for being mean. But honestly, I don't mind. Like, I kinda like Duncan actually being a little bit adventurous. But also, I really like Rusty and Duncan's rivalry in this episode. It's pretty spot on. Though it is kinda weird that they just kept the trucks of coal in the closed mine, like couldn't they have just gotten those out before the mine closed? But overall, this is the best episode in the season of a narrow gauge character who isn't new, so you know what? Good for you, Duncan.
Chicken.
To be honest, when I was a kid, the most forgettable episode of Season 9 to me was Thomas Tries His Best. I don't really know why, I just kinda forgot it every time I watched it. But rewatching it, this episode is actually pretty good. And the reason why this episode is really good is because this episode is basically just a normal day for Thomas. That's literally the episode. Like, in this episode, Thomas needs to bring some chickens to the farm, but he wants to see like a theme park. So he does his job, and then sees the theme park. And that's it. It's just a nice little story of Thomas learning to be patient, and then he sees the theme park's opening. So you know what? That's pretty good. I don't actually have anything else to say about this episode. It's just a nice little comfy episode.
Everywhere on Sodor is special, and so are the people and the children and the engines. We are all special.
Fuck you! You fucking...
Percy and the Oil Painter is surprisingly a really good Percy episode, for being the only Percy episode in this season. I mean, it's another one of those episodes where they do the 3-strike formula actually pretty good. I mean, in this episode, a painter comes to Sodor and Percy has to show him the wonders of Sodor, but he doesn't find anything interesting and just makes stupid excuses about it. As the episode goes, Percy doubts the painter's ideas and then calls him out for just having stupid excuses for not finding anything interesting. And honestly, I love this scene because you can tell where Percy is coming from. But then the painter draws him instead because he sees that Percy actually is the wonder of Sodor because he truly cares about Sodor. So you know what? That's actually quite sweet. And also, for a season opener, this episode is pretty good. Moving on.
Why are you...
Toby Feels Left Out is basically the only good Toby episode in the hit era. Like, literally. In every other Toby episode, he learns about an information, then becomes sad and then doesn't do anything. But after learning about the museum that's being built, and realizing that Sir Topham Hatt didn't find him to tell him about the information, he starts being worried that he may put him in the museum. So he starts working harder to prove that he's still really useful. And honestly, this is really good. Sure, it's kinda stupid that he keeps running away from Sir Topham Hatt when he approaches him, but honestly, overall, other than that, this is a really good episode compared to every other Toby episode. So you know what? I'll take it. Moving on. Keeping Up with James is, to me at least, is a very underrated James episode. Like, okay, James and Gordon's episodes in the hit era were still pretty good, but this episode is weirdly overlooked for some reason. Sure, it's kinda odd that James hates Edward again for some reason, but honestly, it's not too bad. I mean, they do reconcile and deliver the present, so overall, it's not too problematic. Also, I just love how James slides around everywhere, it's just fun, and because of that, Michelangelos made the best sound effect ever again. Sure, it's kinda weird that they depict Edward again kinda pathetic, but honestly, it's not too bad here. Plus, the crash in this episode is really good. Though, it's kinda weird when Sir Topham Hatt visits the crash sites, he goes there by Salty. Like, was Salty the only available engine? Like, why? But other than that, this episode is really good. I highly recommend it. Now it's time for the A-tier episodes. Let's go.
Really, Thomas? Go on, Percy. That's nice.
Thomas and the Statue is surprisingly a funny episode, like, unironically so. So in this episode, Sir Topham Hatt got a statue from somewhere for the Northwestern Railway and Thomas has to deliver it, but when Thomas sees it, he thinks it's of himself, which leads to him bragging about it to everyone, until Percy snaps to him and tells him to shut up because no one cares. So when it's time to reveal it, it starts snowing, so Thomas decides to clear the line, which surprises everyone, but when he comes back, it's revealed that the statue is of everyone, or at least the main 8 of the Northwestern Railway. And honestly, that's quite sweet. But the reason why this episode is really good, because there are so many funny moments. I love when Thomas just wakes up Percy about the statue and Percy just goes like,
Really, Thomas? You and Percy? That's nice.
plus, Cranky is cranky and you gotta love that, you know? Plus, I really like the autumn look of this episode. But other than that, this episode is really good. Moving on.
Meet my friend Dennis.
Thomas's Day Off is the episode where Dennis shows up, let's freaking go! I mean, come on, how can you not love Dennis? He's the best character in the entire show. Honestly, I just ironically love this character, like, it's mostly because of nostalgia, because Thomas's Day Off, to me at least, is the most nostalgic episode, and I always saw Dennis, and honestly, it's just because of that I love this character. But other than that, this episode is still pretty good. I mean, Dennis is a lazy diesel, which sure, Daisy is also a lazy diesel, but honestly, I still like Dennis, like he is different from Daisy. I mean, the way he and Thomas bounce off each other is really good, honestly, like really funny indeed. Also, I just love how Dennis keeps bribing Thomas to do his job even though Thomas has a day off, like that's also really good. And also, the crash in this episode is really good, like I love it. But also, this episode was wrote by Sharon Miller. Like, how can you do Perfection and The Worst Thing Ever in the same franchise? Like how? How can you do that? I really gotta know. But yeah, this episode is really good, I love it, and it has Dennis in it. What else could you ask for?
Now back to 2.5 Engine.
Mighty Mac is the only episode in this season which, you know, introduces a new character, and it's actually about that new character and not of Thomas. So, you know, that's kind of sad, but also this episode is really good. Like, it's really unique that Mighty Mac is an engine with two heads. Like, that is a really good idea with lots of potential. I mean, I love how they keep fighting on which way to go, like, that's fun, and I love the scene where they go on the third table and spin. Plus, I like how the humans have an important role in this episode, like, you don't usually see that in a Hit Terror episode, so you know what, good for this episode. And yeah, it's kinda sad that after this episode, Mighty Mac basically did nothing in the show, but you know what, this episode was really good. Now, moving on to the last spot, which I'm guessing you already guessed at the beginning. Honestly, if you didn't think Respect for Gordon would be at number 1, then I don't know what you were thinking, because Respect for Gordon is infamously at this point known as the best Hit Terror episode, and I agree with that. I mean, this episode is so good, it really feels like a classic era episode. Like, you could easily just make a classic era episode. I mean, Gordon's character in this episode is really good, and I also love how it shows the characters that they don't necessarily like Gordon, but they do kind of miss him when he goes to the works, and they can't necessarily work as well. And you know, it's good that Gordon learns to not dictate any of the other engines to, you know, respect him all times, even though he did nothing, so, you know, good for Gordon, he learned a good lesson. Plus, the crash is really good as usual. Sure, I may have not talked about this episode as much, but honestly, I feel like everyone has said everything positive about this episode. And honestly, yeah, this episode deserves to be the best Hit Terror episode. It's really good, and if you have not watched it, then go ahead, watch it later. So yeah, that was the ranking of Season 9 of Thomas. Sure, it may have been not the most interesting ranking in the world, but I think you should have expected that as a Hit Terror season. I still think this is the best Hit Terror season, and I will cherish this season as it's really nostalgic to me. And yeah, it goes to show that even though there are some pretty bad episodes in this season, the good episodes outshine it by a lot. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you'll have a great dinner, and I'll see you next time.